We do all kinds of things here at Word in Your Ear.
We do podcasts.
We do video casts.
Quizzes.
Crowdcasts with famous authors.
And we can guarantee to make your next birthday one you will never forget.
There's only one way to make sure you get all of this, you get it in full, and you get it first.
And that's by becoming a supporter on Patreon.
Details here.
Word in Your Attic, a Zoom with a view.
Well, welcome to another Word in Your Attic, where we are delighted to be joined by the author and scriptwriter, actor, and former East Anglian funk punk entertainer, Charlie Higson. Charlie, it's fantastic to see you.
It's marvellous to be here.
How is life? Where are you and how are you, basically?
I am in, this technically would have been my attic some time ago. It is a loft conversion in North London, in Tufnell Park, behind what used to be Holloway Prison, but is now no more. And I've been well. We've all been well. I mean, I'm one of those annoying people that I was pretty much in lockdown anyway before.
I was going to say, if you're principally a writer, it doesn't really affect things that much,
and,
does
you
it?
know, a lot of people on Twitter go, "Oh yeah, it's all right for you." And I appreciate where they're coming from totally. However, you know, I've got three boys in their 20s, and you know the way that things have affected them has been.
Are they all at home?
Are they away or at home? Yeah.
The oldest one has moved out, not far. He's only gone to Hackney. In fact, the second one has just moved out this week. He's and my second boy Jim is in a band, and last year would have been their big year. They had so much stuff lined up. They had
What are they called?
They're called Kawala. I'm doing some promotion.
Oh, good for you. Okay. Yeah.
He's a bit dyslexic, my son. It's true, that used to be his gaming tag, and he always thought that was how you spelled koala bear. And you know, they had tours lined up. They had Glastonbury lined up. They had big dates in London they were going to be doing, and of course none of that happened. They have
it's appalling to ask his dad to describe their music, but because that would be embarrassing. But what do they sound like? You know what?
It's kind of pop music. They started as a sort of indie folk type of a deal. It's based around, there's two of them. They both sing together, and it's kind of 2-part harmonies. And you know, if you find two. It's unusual and difficult to find a kind of two voices that meld. If you've got three, it's easier. Yeah. But sometimes you get that thing where you can't quite tell whose voice is which, and it is an amazing effect. And my boy Jim, he was dyslexic at school. He did struggle with things. The one thing he liked doing was music, and he did proper lessons. And he is a really good singer. And you know, it puts me to shame. I, despite 6 years as a professional singer, was a terrible singer, which meant our band was quite limited, and we had a fairly limited lifespan because we were fine doing shouty, drunken, sort of scratchy, slightly too fast white funk punk.
Who stole my bongos? Did you steal my bongos? Wasn't that one of my favourite couplets from your great lyric?
Was one of the few times I managed to actually write quite a good lyric. I struggled with lyric because I'd never liked putting anything personal out there. So, you know, kind of our music was great as a kind of live thing up to a certain level where you could had that connection with the audience, and half of them would end up on stage, and that was great. But when it came to recording or moving on and writing more substantial songs, because I couldn't really sing, I could shout. There was always a shelf life to the band. But you know, Jim, my boy, as a really good singer, you kind of think, well, he'll always be able to do a career of some sort in music, because he has something a lot more to offer.
So what are they doing? They're just spending all the time rehearsing, presumably.
They've been rehearsing, they've been writing, and they have actually been recording quite a lot. But because it is their job and it is work, then they are allowed to be in the studio.
I see. Right. Okay.
Yeah, they do get regularly tested.
Oh, really?
And the other really interesting thing is seeing the difference between how music is made and distributed, and how people know about it now, as compared to how it was. in my day. I mean, it's absolutely fascinating. And this last year has really forced them to focus on that side of it, the online side of it. I mean, they managed to get a track on the new FIFA game.
Oh, right.
And
that's a big deal, presumably.
That's fantastic.
Because you're suddenly listening to people all around the world, and if they like it, they'll follow it up. And they can notice because they're on Spotify, and Spotify will send them all the breakdown, all the kind of logistics of who's been listening to it. Where
really?
They come back and listen again.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Amazing.
Yeah, it is.
And so, they can instantly see the effect of what happened to going on FIFA. And as a result of being on FIFA, somebody from Love Island did a TikTok with their FIFA track.
There you go.
A lot of people started listening to, it got, a big spike on trending on TikTok. And then Jim and his bandmate, Dan, the other singer, did a response to the Love Island thing, and their thing went even bigger, and it became I think it is still trending at the moment, a big sort of TikTok hit, and this is so alien to anything
because it's kind of out of your control, isn't it? Really, presumably, you don't plug your way onto FIFA. I would imagine it just happens, does it?
There's a certain amount of. I think the big record labels I think they do have a certain amount of clout saying, you try this one, but obviously, if they don't like it, they're not going to use it. They don't think it'll work.
But also things were so gradual, weren't they? 20, 30 years ago, you might get a review here, and you might get on the John Peel show, and you might get a radio one. And now it can go from nothing to absolutely overnight with your sea shanty or whatever. You're rocketed from being a postman to being an international star.
Exactly. But I think, as was always the case, you have got to be able to back that up.
Yeah.
And there was, I think it was used to be a thing where, you could, with the label support behind you and a bit of money in the right places, get your single up into the charts, as a thing. But you can't spend those resources that time for every subsequent single. So if you don't have the chops to keep delivering, and particularly if you haven't, say, written that single, you've gone to a hit team, it's difficult. But so actually, if you've got some musical skills and you've got a big, a good catalogue of things, that is always the case that's going to do well for you. I mean, what put it in perspective for me, because back in our day, it was all about paying your dues, wasn't it? It was about, you've got to slog around the circuit in your minivan.
Yeah.
And you've got to get really good live, and you've got to, and if you pay those dues and you work hard, you will, every band assumes they are going to be big.
Yeah.
They're going to be massive. And, there's a lot of stuff now about how, it's very difficult for bands to monetize what they're doing. It always was. Most bands never made a penny.
No,
and a lot of them ended up massively in debt to their record when they left. I mean, obviously, you could make more money, but every band thought, yes, if we do this, if we push, because we're real, because we believe in it, we will get massive. And we did that. My band, the Higsons, and we slogged away. Our first single went to #1 in the indie charts, which was great, and it was all downhill after that. Another 6 of paying our dues and thinking, and we would have massive arguments about where we were going to put the drums on top of the pops. Because our drummer, like all drummers, really resented me as a singer, particularly a particularly poor singer. Saying, I'm using all fucking 4 limbs here. I'm a proper, this takes skill. And actually, the drums were a huge part of what we did. And so he said, when we go on top of the pops, it's really important we put the drums right up front.
Oh, he actually said that?
Yes.
That's great.
So we'd have a big argument. I was saying, well, I think the director will probably decide where they put the drums. He said, no, we have to stick to our... So we had stupid arguments. And,
mercifully, that situation never arose.
No.
Well, you weren't ever on top of the pops, were you?
No, you see... our biggest ever, our highest chart placing for single, I think, was 72, with a cover of the Andy Williams song, Music to Watch Girls By, just towards the end of our career. And that was that. And so, that was 6 years slogging away. Cut to a few years later, we do, me and Paul Whitehouse and Harry Anfield create loads of money and he has a fairly meteoric rise through Saturday Night Live. And, you know, back in those days, you would do a novelty single. So we did a novelty single. We went into a studio for a day. We were quite lucky because William Orbit produced it and co-wrote it with us. So we spent a day with William Orbit in the studio. We didn't have any ideas when we turned up in the morning. He had a couple of beats he'd put together. We did some shouting over the top of it. And it goes to number 2 in the chart. And we all go on top of the pops. And that, for me, I thought, okay, I understand show business now. I understand the music business. It's not about paying your dues. It's having the right thing at the right time that someone wants. And bang, there you are on top of the pop. So yes, we were on top of the pop.
Oh, you were, yeah.
With William Orbit, yes.
Fantastic. Oh, that's brilliant. Well, look, Charlie, we should traditionally, we ask people to go back to the household they grew up in. And any memories of any records playing when where did you grow up? Was it Somerset? I can't remember where you were.
I was born in Somerset. I have no memories of that. The 2 places I do remember is we lived near Crawley.
Oh, right.
Years, a little place called Three Bridges near East Grinstead. And then we moved to Sevenoaks in Kent. So it was very much kind of home counties.
Can you remember the records playing in the house at the time?
Well, my parents only had one record.
I like this. Can we guess? Can we Andy Williams?
No, you would never guess it. It was a good one though, and I wanted to try and get it, but unfortunately, all my stuff is in storage, and it would have meant moving thousands of boxes. And much as I love you two, I thought, sorry, I'll just talk about it. No, they had a party. And they thought, well, we're having a party. We're going to have to play some music.
Get a record.
Yeah. So
we got the drinks. We just need a record. Yes, right. Yeah.
And they bought an album by Sounds Incorporated.
Oh my Lord! Yes.
Wow.
Who were, well, as you know, a group of session musicians who essentially, whenever the American rock and roll acts came over, Sounds Incorporated would be their backing band. So they had a really tight band. Yeah. And it is an album of instrumentals.
Oh, very good.
Half of which are kind of sort of rock and roll classics that they would have played. I remember there's a version of, do you know the song Last Night?
Oh, well, the Marquees last night.
Yeah, it's got a sort of novelty aspect to it.
All right.
Well, anyway, but so it was half sort of songs like that, and then it was half sort of pop versions of classical music, like A Charge of the Light Cavalry.
This must have been a swinging party.
Flights of the Bumblebee.
I think it may well have inspired Sabre Dance. You know, it was that.
Yeah.
And I listened to that album incessantly as a fairly young boy, because it was a very light and easy introduction to the world of pop music. There was nothing raucous and loud and scary about it. And I would sort of the Charge of the Light Cavalry, I think that's what it's called. It's got to sound like that. I would sit on the arm of the sofa and pretend that I was in a cavalry charge, things like that. So I did get a huge amount of pleasure out of that album. And before I got rid of the record player, I would still listen to it quite.
Can you remember the first singles you bought yourself?
I was a fairly snobbish boy as a teenager, and I steered clear of pop music. I was into classical music. I was into jazz. First album I bought was a Fats Waller album.
Oh, right.
Which shows you how hip I was.
That's
really good.
It's really interesting. Yeah.
Which was actually quite fun, because then my parents talked about how when they were first courting, which would have been in the 40s, I guess, that they would listen to Fats Waller on the radio. So there was a connection, you know, that they had listened to this music, but, you know, they just didn't buy the record. So I had quite a lot of classical albums, and I had things like Fats Waller. But my eldest brother was 4 years older than me, and he actually had a pretty good 70s record collection. And like a lot of people, my tastes were influenced by the records that he had. And my favorite amongst them was the Velvet Underground, the first.
Oh, really?
One with the banana on the front. I think he's actually did have a a detachable banana on it.
Oh,
So,
so
you know,
he was obviously a bit cutting edge, your older brother.
Well, he was. Yeah, I mean, he was quite an eclectic mix. There was that, or quite a lot of sort of German sort of stuff like Can.
All right.
Stuff like that. But my two favourites were the Velvet Underground and Astral Weeks.
Right.
The two albums which I still listen to a lot.
How old would you have been when, I'm trying to think, because you were born in what, late 50s?
I was born in
you would have been
58.
10 when Astral Weeks came out, 11 maybe. But you didn't hear it then. Did you hear it then or a bit later?
No, I heard it. I mean, he must have bought it when it came out.
At the time, yeah.
So, you know, and the great thing about that album is you can listen to it over and over again without getting bored. Largely, and we'll maybe talk about this later, I'm not that interested in lyrics. I prefer a lyric that I don't really understand.
Really?
It's been explained to me later what all the songs on there are about, but I prefer just to impose my own meaning. So, and also,
that's really interesting. How extraordinary!
Well, because I think that's one of the reasons.
So, who are your favourite lyricists? I mean, who are the people who are the least?
Well, I mean, Bob Dylan is quite
Dylan,
front, because 90% of that, you know, whether it was a true story or not, you know, when he came to write his autobiography book, he had to keep asking the fans what he did and what his songs were about because he couldn't remember. And you know, he would just throw out poetic imagery, and you could get into that. So I like that aspect. It's one of the reasons I listen to a huge amount of world music, and in fact, my brother had quite a good world music collection. It wasn't called world music then. He was sort of on the fringes of hippiedom and everything that comes with it. So,
but part of the appeal of world music is that you can't understand. I can't understand what anyone's singing about, and so therefore you have your own interpretation of every song. It's like if you ever go to the WOMAD Festival. Have you ever been to WOMAD Festival?
You know, I never have. I'm actually not a great festival goer.
No, but it's just because it's all world music. You're wandering around and you don't feel that thing which you do at kind of normal rock festivals, where you're riveted by what somebody is actually singing about, and you're being required to have a relationship with that person on stage. When you don't understand what they're singing about, it's completely relaxing. It's just the sound of it.
And again, you can impose your own meaning on it. And
absolutely.
You know, and I've always, you know, if you ever look into what they are singing in a lot of world music stuff, it's always a disappointment.
Really prosaic.
Yeah.
My car's broken down. You know.
It's right.
Yeah. Well, it's like
the water jug is empty.
You know, like Chan Chan off Buena Vista Social Club, that song that became so ubiquitous, and again, it's probably one of the songs I listen to most. I did look up the words for that, and it was something about I went to see the girl, and she was quite nice. She came from this place, this village. I'd like to go back to the village sometime. It's something like that. But yes,
what a story, Buena Vista Social Club. Don't you think it's amazing? The film is so wonderful,
extraordinary. No, I mean, you know, that we're probably. I won't get into favorite albums now because you probably want to ask me later, but that would be something I would talk about. But yes, no, I don't like. I've never really got into lyrics, and I've never sort of got into a band because I love the lyrics and the songwriting. I just like the feel of a song, and I think it's probably one of the reasons I've never heavily been into sort of pop music and mainstream music, because so many of those songs only have one meaning. And you know, how often do you want to sit down with someone who's telling you the same thing again, like some awful drunk in a pub? So, yes, Kylie, I know you should be so lucky, but
yes, I know you can't get him out of your head. That's right. Yeah.
And there are times for this. You know, if you're at a party and you're dancing, like I did a couple of times in my life, you know, that's great. Or if you're driving in your car, you have driving music in that. But for most of the time, if you're just wanting to have music in your life and listen to music, I don't want it to necessarily grab me by the neck and say, "You should be so lucky."
No.
Yeah. Can you remember any of the first bands you ever saw then? And where would that have been?
Well, in Sevenoaks, I would come up to London a bit. And I had a friend at school who was a bit more into music, and we would go up, and again, we'd be slightly influenced by some of the older kids at school. We had a fantastic art department at school, which is where I learned most of the things that have been useful to me in my life. I learned more in there than any other. I had an amazing art teacher, a guy called Bob White, and it was a place that you would go and hang out, and people would play records, and I would get through that. I got into Bob Dylan and stuff like that. Typical 70s art department with the older students playing Bob Dylan. And through that, I think one of the first people I went to see in London was James Booker, who was a New Orleans piano player.
Yeah.
He had a fantastic album out called Junko Partners.
Yeah.
I used to play a lot of piano, and I used to try and play kind of blues and boogie-woogie. But I mean, that New Orleans piano style is incredibly difficult to play. Professor Longhair is obviously the best known proponent of that, but the left hand of the New Orleans piano is extraordinary. I love that rolling New Orleans beat. Yeah. And it was amazing to go and see.
Is that stride piano? I'm trying to think what it's called.
Stride. It's a type of stride. Stride is more boom, boom. So the left hand is going bass chord.
Yeah.
In New Orleans, they put in the two bass notes. So it goes do do ding ding do do ding ding. So you're playing two bass notes and two chords, and then you're playing this frilly stuff in the right hand.
Yeah.
And it's a very beguiling beat. So it was fantastic to go and see him. Who else did I see? And there's a Roogalator.
Right, yes.
Danny Adler's Roogalator.
Danny Adler, I saw them. They came on in 4 matching one-piece zip-up jumpsuits.
Yes.
I remember them vividly. Might have even had numbers on them. I can't remember. Yeah. They were really good. I felt so sorry for all those groups, because they were just, there they all were, just about to break, and then punk rock arrived and just knocked
some
them
of them
out.
Managed to pretend that they were.
Yeah, Ian Dury and the Blockheads, they managed to
absolutely. Yeah.
And the Stranglers and some of those. They're old, aren't they? But yes, I actually quite got into. That was probably the first sort of pop music that was around that I gone to, was the sort of last days of pub rock.
Yeah,
I liked that because there was a lot of that sort of playing those, American styles, and it had a more interesting approach to what was going on, and it wasn't so mainstream. And I used to listen to Charlie Gillett's radio.
Right.
Radio London.
London.
And he used to play a fantastic mix of reggae and blues and a lot of pub rock. As I remember him playing Dire Straits, he used to play that a lot. Their first.
Well, he was the first
person to made that record, didn't he?
Yeah. Before anyone had ever heard him. So I guess going to see Roogalator was out of that interest in that whole sort of pub rock scene. And certainly when punk started, it was the ones that were more on that sort of arty pub rock friends that I like the sort of stuff that Stiff did on their first few, their first compilation. That was an album I bought. And
XTC, would that have been your band?
Yeah, I liked XTC. Yeah. I remember seeing them on some program on the TV and thinking, that's quite interesting. Yeah,
because they were one of those examples of those punk rock groups who could really, really play incredibly technically proficient and had to adapt to punk and speed up and get kind of aggressive and challenging
and shout
Yeah.
So where did you see Roogalator?
It would have been one of the small London clubs, like the 100 Club or the
right.
What was the one in Covent Garden down the steps?
The Rock Garden.
Rock Garden.
Yeah,
one of those.
Yeah,
that was a sort of scale of clubs, the smaller ones. We
right.
went to see a few things, and through that and through people at school, I quite got into Graham Parker.
All right.
Of all people. And I remember going to see him, and he was supported by The Damned. So that would have been the first time I saw an actual punk rock group.
Right.
And they were bloody awful.
Why were they awful?
Well, because the sound was terrible and they were all over the place. And they were doing it for effect, And, Rat Scabies kicked his drum kit all over the stage. And then the roadie came and carefully picked it all up for him. It was, and it was in a more of it was one of the sort of theatre style. I think that might have been the one in Might even have been the one in Victoria, the theatre there that used to be.
Oh, the New Victoria.
The venue? Yeah.
It was one of those.
Oh,
yeah.
venue.
Something like that. So that was sort of sitting down in a balcony, and that's not the way to watch the Damned. You know, I think if I'd seen them in somewhere like the 100 Club, drunk and with the correct stimulants, it would have worked better. But sitting there all nicely waiting for Graham Parker, the Damned were not for me at the time. And yeah, you know, I really got into those first Graham Parker albums, and I haven't listened to them in about 30 years. I don't think.
Well, we got a wonderful sign in the Times yesterday that Graham, who's been a guest on this Word in Your Attic himself, I followed him on Twitter, and I see that he posted on Twitter yesterday that he went to have his COVID jab at Lord's. I thought, this we ought to have more of this. I want to see rock stars slowly fessing up to their age in terms of the fact that they've had their COVID jab. We haven't had the good news about the Rolling Stones yet, have we? They've kept very
quiet,
low profile about.
I know that's the awkwardness about the COVID jab. Is if you meet somebody in the street and say, "Have you had your jab?" It's basically like saying, "How old are you?"
You feel like saying
they're offended if you ask them. I'm in my 50s. How dare you? You know?
Surely the Stranglers have been undone months ago. For God's sake.
He was quite interesting, Graham Parker, because you know he had those first couple of albums which were pretty big here, and then he became big in America, didn't he?
Well, he got kind of patchy, I think. He is kind of interesting, really.
He certainly got bigger there than here, because again, he was one of those people who
he had a terrible record company in the States. Never happened in the anyway.
Yeah, well, you know, punk sort of
wrote songs about how terrible they were. In fact,
and then I was reading recently the album he made that basically the tapes were all ruined or something, and they had to redo every track, I think.
Oh, I was surprised. That's what happened in those days. They used to, Fleetwood Mac used to have this, that they ran the old tapes so many times past the heads, overdubbing and so forth, that it was rotting or something by the time they got to master it. It had to start again. You know, in the old days of, you know, proper tape, those are the kind of things that happened. Extraordinary.
Did you read the music papers?
Well, of course I did. I mean, you know, in the 70s, you were defined by the music paper that you bought. And, you know, so, I mean, I probably got into music sort of 76, 77. So tail end of pub rock, moved into punk rock, went to university and became a punk student in Norwich. In Norwich, it was a proper sort of Alan Partridge punk, I suppose.
You were ahead of the game with the kind of lampooning of Norwich, weren't you? Because this is great gang about the three centres of excellence. And all that.
We were celebrating it, and we were part of it. You know, we created the Norwich music scene.
I always thought that was sarcastic because you were on a compilation album called Norwich, a Fine City.
Norwich, a Fine City.
That's right.
It was sort of sarcastic, but it was also we were all in Norwich, and that's the sign that they have on the outskirts of Norwich.
Yeah.
That's their brand.
Yes.
Norwich, a fine city.
That's correct.
And yes, so you would, you know, and for me, it was the enemy.
Yeah.
Right.
More sort of intellectual of the music papers. And of course, that era was where all the greats were, you know, Paul Morley and Ian Penman and Julie Birchall and Danny Baker. And it was an exciting time, and you had to, you know, you would go out and made sure you got it. And then once I was in a band, you know, you had to get it. You would go and queue up at the newsagent when it opened to see and buy all the papers to see if there was any mention of your band. And
I can say, can you remember the first mention?
Yes, can you remember your first review? I'm sure you can. I'm sure you've got it there, in fact.
Yeah, well, I've got. I did
right.
keep scrapbooks.
Right.
Fantastic.
So, yeah, that's sort of very early days in Norwich. Yeah, and you know, as I say, our here we go. Look, there's an indie chart from it would have been 1981 when the first single came out. You probably can't read it. You're old and have bad eyesight. But I'm
trying to think who would have been in the indie
I Don't Want to Live with Monkeys. There you are, number one in the alternative charts there.
So that would have been around the time of the kind of the Ravishing Beauties and groups like that, wouldn't it? Attila the Stockbroker. Those are the kind of people who were getting sessions on Peel around the time I think you were on. You had a Peel session,
it was a sort of period of transition.
Yeah.
And we sort of described ourselves as punk funk. We were very, very heavily influenced by the Talking Heads, although we were always furious if a journalist ever tried to claim it. What are you talking about? Just because I
never heard them.
This guy sing a high-pitched voice and listen to all their records and try and copy them. So I was trying to find there were some funny things in here. So yeah, you would always be hoping that you would get on the cover of NME, and that is a cover of the NME. That's from August 1981. That's not us on the cover. That's Bob Dylan. But we are mentioned. Our name.
That's great.
That was the closest we ever got.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
And we had good press when we started for the first single. After that, it was kind of, we annoyed people. They thought we weren't taking it seriously and that we were from Norwich and we were just mucking about, which we were slightly, but we were having a good time and the audiences really enjoyed it. But people thought we were irritating and we weren't, taking the great music seriously. That's a nice photo.
That is.
A lot of people remember that was Kevin Cummings.
Oh, right.
From the
and your nom de stage was Spike, wasn't it? Is that right?
Switch,
sorry. Not Spike, yes. Switch.
It wasn't my first band. My first band was a punk rock band, a student punk rock band in 1977 with Paul Whitehouse, who I met at UEA, University of East Anglia. Hang on. I've got a box of photos here. Here we are. So, yeah, that's me and Paul. Me singing, Paul on the guitar.
Heavy application of eye makeup.
Yes, boys.
Very
that's
good.
Boys makeup.
And that's Paul. That's terrific.
Yeah.
Wow, quite ghoulish. Yeah.
Yes. Well, we're student punks.
Yeah. Gothic.
That's Dave Cummings, who was in a band. He went on to Commotion, and then Lloyd Delamitri was in.
Oh, right. Okay.
Is a very handsome bass player.
Fantastic.
And yeah, so
what were they called? The group with Paul Whitehouse?
We were called the Right Hand Lovers.
Okay.
These are all band names, if they're not famous, are funny, aren't they? They just years later, they're just funny.
Yeah.
And you can never imagine them ever being successful. Once even a terrible band name is
once
successful.
they are successful, you have no trouble with the name whatsoever.
Yeah, the Beatles, brilliant name. That's right. Yeah.
And Rolling Stones. I mean, most band names are shit.
Yeah.
But you sort of forget that. And yes, as you say, when you look back, I mean, it's really funny looking through some of the old sort of posters for festivals and things in the scrapbook of remembering, oh my God, yes, all those bands. And the other thing is, nobody has ever made up a realistic sounding fictional name for a band.
Yes, I know what you mean.
Or a film or TV. And you were saying, that band would be called.
Absolutely.
It's a weird thing, isn't it?
Because I know they're not strange enough, are they really? They're just slightly bland. The ones that people make up. I know what you mean.
And it's one of the hardest things when you're forming a band.
Has anybody written a convincing fictional account of a rock band's life, though? I mean, we've talked about this before. The people have tried, but it's very hard to make it work.
I think there's only one. It's The Last Mad Surge of Youth by Mark Hodgson, who used to write for Word. He wrote a little book. It's really good. And I've read loads of attempts to do it.
Yeah.
And it's incredibly hard.
This didn't David Mitchell write?
David Mitchell has done it recently. Yeah,
very recently. We had him on this show.
Yeah. Oh, Nick Kent's just done it. Is a novel just coming out with it about a fictional band.
But I mean, the film that feels most real about what it's like to be in a band is Spinal Tap.
Yes,
it is.
That is every aspect of that. Every band has gone through, whether they're heavy metal or.
absolutely.
Do you think how many people have said of an enormous range, you know, from the obvious kind of metal bands and all that to people like Tom Waits have said that they were moved to tears by watching that film?
Yeah.
Because they said it was so accurate. It was so like, it's just because it deals with the minutiae and the boredom. You know, everyone thinks what a glamorous life, but you know, you've got your 2 hours on stage and then hours of sound checks and hanging around waiting for your sandwiches to be delivered, and that's where that's the corrosive element of the life that they capture so well.
Still today, my boy Jim in his band, you know, he's watched that film loads of times because it feels so real to him. We've all done it, you know, the getting lost backstage, and
the other key thing is the fact that it's the girlfriend that starts to create the friction. You think how many bands historically were bust up by the fact that somebody didn't get on with someone else's girlfriend or went off with somebody else's girlfriend? You know, one of the Ramones went off with the other one's girlfriend, and they didn't talk to each other for about 20 years, but they kept together as a band.
Still played.
And designing the shirts and all that. I mean, it's just. Well, we had a. It's not funny enough to put in a film. A few Spinal Tap moments with our original guitarist, a great guy called Stuart McGeekin, who had a terrible, terrible sense of direction. You'd rock up in the van outside the venue, and he'd get out and walk off. He said, "Where are you going?" He said, "Well, I think it's down there." Said, "No, we're there. We're outside." And then I remember when we were doing some big charity benefit thing where you didn't really get a sound check or anything, and so you're rushed on, and there's the curtains there, so you can't actually see the audience because they're curtains. I mean, obviously you can hear them, and we all come on and set up, and we're all ready to go. And I look around, and Stuart is facing the back wall. I go, "What are you doing, Stuart?" Yeah. So look, can you not hear? There's an audience out there. There's a curtain there. No, he was ready to go. So I mean. Yes, it's such a difficult thing to get right. Even people who've been in bands trying to sort of write stories of fictional bands never quite work.
No, because the truth is just better. It beggars the fictional attempt to do it.
The real stories.
So how have you found the kind of, you know, because you've known the music world and the comedy world, and you know where guys in, you know, comedy teams, do they have similar relationships to guys in bands, or do you think it's a different thing?
I think they do. I mean, you know, there's so many bands have been based around a central partnership of two people who are the key. It's often like the singer and the guitarist, or, you know, because often it's not always the singer who writes everything, obviously.
No.
And obviously the classic model for that is Lennon and McCartney. And certainly in the comedy world, a lot of comedy writing partnerships tend to be two people. In the UK, we can't afford to do the big American team thing. So many comedies have been written by two people working together. And some of those have stuck together through thick and thin, like Clement Lefrenay and the Steptoe writers, Galton and Simpson, yes, and others, you know, have had quite bad breakups over the years, because you always get to that point in any relationship. If you've spent your whole life working really closely with someone, I'm sure you two have it all the time, you get to a point where you think, you know what, I'm the better. I do all the bloody hard work, and they're getting all the from credit. If I have an idea and they try to change it, if I can fight and do this, if it was just me, I could do exactly what I wanted and it would be brilliant. And mostly it's not. You know, most people are better with that tension that you get from having to convince. You know, in my comedy with Paul, you've got to try and make him laugh, and that's when you know something's working. And actually, I think one of the reasons that I've managed to keep a strong relationship with Paul, and we do still work together, is he uniquely, I think, was kind of involved in two relationships like that. He had the one with me and he had the one with Harry Enfield.
Right.
And so he could you know, half the time he'd be working with Harry and we wouldn't be in each other's hair, and he could be doing other things. And the other half the time he could be with me. So, and now, in fact, now he's got threes. He's got his double act with Bob Mortimer now. So
Right, of course.
he's done pretty well on that front.
So it's interesting. This, you know, if you take Lennon and McCartney, I always got the feeling McCartney was the person who said, let's do this, let's do this, let's do this. And Lennon kind of reluctantly or whatever. I don't know. You know, Lennon was not the person to turn up in the morning and say, I've got an idea. McCartney was the one to do it. Have you found that in your?
I think you need. In any fruitful partnership like that, you've got to be different to each other.
Yeah,
you've both got to bring something that the other can't bring. And I think, you know, it's the same with a marriage as well. You know,
but also people often say that if you're a writing partnership, one types and the other one paces. Do you find that
true?
where the person who's typing is actually the one who's ultimately in control of the editing process?
Yes.
The other one who just don't bother to write down that thing. So I think it's quite funny. That's brilliant. That's so brilliant. You know, they're not putting it down at all. And the other one gets the impression that they're the kind of blue sky genius, eating biscuits and being hilarious. You know.
Well, it kind of is. But it's more complex. I always use a pretentious musical analogy of the left and the right hand on a piano.
Oh, right.
And a good writing relationship, and probably a good music writing relationship, is exactly the same, is the left hand and the right hand, where the left hand is, as you say, that's the guy at the computer. The left hand is structuring it and holding down, you know, the melody, and it's like, okay, we go boom, boom, boom. It's not very showy. The right hand's going diddly dim, diddly dim, diddly dim, and doing all that stuff. But they can't do that without someone holding down the dull bottom end. And actually that's quite interesting, because in my relationship with Paul, I was the one at the computer. In fact, the reason we started writing together, we met, say, in 1977 in Norwich. We both were interested in music and punk rock. And in those days at university, if you wanted to arse about and get on stage and impress your mates and get off with girls, you started a band. It was before the days of alternative comedy. Harry Enfield, being that much younger than us, he had a double act, a comedy act. So we would never have thought, well, let's do some comedy. But we always would make each other laugh and do stupid characters and voices and whatever. And he didn't last long at UE. He didn't even last a year. He claims he left, but the university claims they threw him out. But we kept in touch over the years. We ended up living together at the same estate in Council Estate in Hackney, and we both had bands. He had another band after our punk band. God, what were they called? Bonsai Forest.
There you go.
Can you imagine that in lights?
Works every time.
I know.
That could have been.
It
could have been a big 80s electro band, couldn't it?
Bonsai Forest. Yeah, that's out of a novel, isn't it?
It's just funny. It ought to be a Christmas game, didn't it? Just endless series of cards of just names of
Is
Christmas.
it a real band or a made-up band? Or is it from a novel?
Yeah.
So, but and then we started. You know, Paul was your archetypal funny mate down the pub. Harry was living on the same estate with us. We shared a squat for a while, and Paul was always making Harry laugh and was always doing characters and voices. And Harry had a live act, and he started doing some of Paul's voices and characters, including the sort of Cockney Greek and whatever. So. And he kept saying to Paul, you should be writing, you should be performing comedy. And Paul didn't think of himself as a writer or a performer. And he approached me, and I had always been writing since I was a kid.
Right.
And I had bought a very early Amstrad word processor.
Oh, yes.
We remember them fondly.
The 8256.
Yeah.
With the
Q magazine was produced by one of those.
Really?
You had to boot it up with one disc, and then you put the disc in that you worked on. And it made a vibrating sound.
Program in, and then you'd have to put the thing in the head.
Yeah.
And
then you'd lose it.
Paul never grasped it.
I bet.
Why are you putting that in? But basically, he came to me and he said, look, I want to write.
How do you write?
You got a word processor and I have. Would you help me?
I bet.
So we sat down and it was very fruitful because it worked out. He was fine to let me sit at the computer, and he would wander around the room throwing out funny ideas. And I'd think, yeah, that bit's funny. We could put them together, structure that into that. So I'd be there making it into a proper piece.
So before the relationship with him, though, had you started writing comedy?
No, I was writing books.
So, right, that's interesting, isn't it? Because it's only when you got another guy who walks up and down and he's the funny guy. Oh, you know what I mean? I'm not suggesting.
Oh, he's the funny guy. Yeah.
No, you know what I mean? Then he kind of.
Oh
no,
it was.
No, you know what I mean?
We neither of us approached it as a plan. It was just, well, Harry's doing comedy and he's making a bit of money out of that. We could maybe do it. It was never a career path, but yeah, it was entirely just happened to be. Yeah, I had a WordPress to write my serious novels on, and it worked. And we found actually, this is a good relationship. And interestingly, when Paul works with Harry's the guy at the computer. So that again is why. And to start with, the three of us worked very closely together, but that didn't work because we had two of us wanting to do the left hand. Me and Harry both wanted to do that. And in the end, he kicked me out.
But those characters that you did, I mean, Swiss Tony and Bob Fleming and Ralph and things, were they inventions with Paul, or were they inventions of your?
I mean, from all over the place. Paul's one of those guys who he'll meet someone for the first time, he'll be able to do an impersonation of them, and he will have got to the essence.
Yeah.
Of who they are and how they talk and the sort of things they say. And you think, I've known this person for 5 years, but I sort of understand
that's
them.
incredible.
Yeah.
And so most of what Paul does is based on people he's met.
Yeah.
So Rowley Birkin, poisonous monkey. I'm afraid I was very, very drunk. That did come from someone he met fishing. He's always been a big fisherman, and he met the president of the Malt Whisky Society in Edinburgh on a fishing trip to Iceland, I think. And he said we'd all sit around and he'd be telling us these stories around the campfire and nobody could understand a single word he said. Suit You, the tailors, that was a guy he worked with at Hackney Council. He was the sort of doorman, and every morning when Paul would come in, say, "Morning, sir. How are you today, sir? You out with a lady last night, sir?" "Oh, Suit You." And so we nicked that. And Stavros was based on the local kebab shop owner in Hackney. Ron Manager was based on a football manager called Alan Stott. So Paul tends to bring things from life.
Yeah.
Come in, so like, I've got this raw material, fantastic. I tend to take a much more intellectual approach. So mine will be an idea of a type of a person. I said, wouldn't it be funny to have this type of person who does this? So for instance, we're writing one day and Paul comes in and he says, "How about doing a character that just coughs?" And he thought, I can't put my finger on it, but there is something funny about that, isn't there? Yeah. So then I would think, well, what would make that? Why would that make that funny? What would be the worst possible job for someone like that to have? Think, a TV presenter who can't stop coughing is quite funny because there's a lot of humor that comes out of people doing things involuntarily that they don't know that they're doing and they have no control over.
And there's some real value in the fact that there's only one gag really, and you just hammer that one gag and it just gets funnier and funnier and funnier.
I mean, it's a hard one, that thinking of new ways we can make someone laugh just by coughing. And
it took me ages to realize that Bob Fleming, of course, is derived from phlegm, isn't it?
Yes,
phlegm, because he coughs all the time. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's how you start putting these things together. Because then everyone said, "What type of TV is it?" And we both grew up. We loved Jack Hargreaves. You remember
the Country File, or what?
It was something like that, or Down Your Way, or something like that, which he presented.
Oh, whatever.
Yeah,
I don't think. I think. Yeah.
And he was a lovely old rural guy, and he said, "Well, this week we have a look at some lovely old horse brasses that someone brought in," and we thought, wouldn't it be great to do a tribute to Jack Hargreaves? But he can't stop coughing. And because I'd been at Norwich, I said, well, I'll try and do an East Anglian accent rather than a West Country accent to make it. So that would be the way that things would go together with my more sort of intellectual input of ideas, him just coming in with a bit of someone he'd met or So that was probably, again, going back to why that's a very fruitful writing relationship.
Yeah.
both bringing something completely different to it. His is a much more spontaneous, emotional approach, and mine's a much more intellectual approach.
Have you been writing comedy during lockdown? And because clearly you're socially distanced and so forth. I mean, I just wonder, does it work if you're not in the same room?
We did an episode of our spoof radio phone-in show for Radio 4 down the line.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
And we did a lockdown special. And the great thing about that show is you can phone it in.
Right.
It's a phone-in show, so we didn't have to be in the same place. We did it all on Zoom and down the phone. And that was really good fun. That was a great thing to do. You know, in that first lockdown when everything was so weird and disorienting and underlying anxiety, nobody.
But it must be so hard also if you're a comedy writer to know whether or not you should allude to that kind of thing. You know, do people want to? I mean, apart from Staged, obviously, which is a brilliant example of people just building an entire construct based on the fact that they were at home. But otherwise, you don't know if you really want to reference it. People want to escape.
Yeah, there's that thing of like, are people going to be sick of this? Wouldn't they rather?
Yeah.
Can you do jokes when people are dying? So, you know, we had to be very careful about the areas we didn't go into. But Down the Line was always it was a sort of social satire about British people and so it was a way of looking at different people and how they react to an event like that, and that was really good. And in fact, tell you what, the last thing, the last major thing we did together was we did a little. Well, this is quite a big sort of look back, celebration of the Fast Show for UK TV on Gold. And it was going to be a Talking Heads program of us doing Talking Heads. And they didn't have a huge amount of money to do extra stuff, but they wanted, and we wanted to try and put some new stuff into it, some new stuff with characters. And we didn't have the resources or the inclination to set up big new sketches. So we had the idea that we would interview the major characters as talking heads, as if they were real people and the Fast Show was a reality program. And so they would be talking about, you know, Swiss Tony saying, so since I've been on the Fast Show, I've been doing TED Talks and inspirational lectures about salesmanship. I'd go into dirty joke. I was going to start one, but I think actually I can't think of a punchline. So, and in fact, we were filming the last couple of days of that as we were going into that first lockdown. And it really felt like it was the last sketch show on earth.
Yes.
Everything was going to shut down. And all this crew we were working with, it was really sad because, you know, during the filming, they'd have been saying, because it was mostly documentary crew, they were saying, oh, I'm following this girl who's going to the Paralympics. She's I think she's in a wheelchair. We're following her. She's traveling right across the world and she's going to there. And then we'll follow her to the Olympics. Phone call. Okay.
No, you're not.
I got a great job. We're going to Thailand and China. What's that? Oh, okay. They were all, you know, all the jobs they had lined up and the makeup, the costume and everything. And London was starting to feel a bit eerie and we were doing these last comedy sketches. And again, on that, we were thinking, because we knew this was going to come out in the middle of lockdown, we were thinking, do we do jokes about COVID in this? Because obviously, Bob Fleming,
yes,
he's the obvious person to sort of say,
clearly suffering.
All right, it's just a COVID. But we thought we can't really do that because what if there's 1 million people dying every day?
Sure.
So it was really tricky times, and that first lockdown was like that. And a lot of people found they couldn't read, they couldn't concentrate, they couldn't. Yeah. We couldn't do anything major. So actually doing Down the Line was a great distraction from that, and it was great fun to do. And on the back of that, because and doing the Fast Show thing where we got all the surviving members, but obviously not Caroline. And we were saying, you know, this is fun. We should do something else together. And we have been talking about maybe trying to do a different project, not a new Fast Show, but something else with the team. But at the moment, everything's so up in the air. Who knows? Who knows what's going to happen?
No, sure. So what else have you been doing? You were working on books?
Yeah, I did. When it started, I could only do sort of distraction jobs, things I wasn't supposed to be doing. But I did. Then, as we came out of the summer, I think, like a lot of people, there was a sort of renewed energy of thinking, let's do something, let's get something out of it. Because when it started, everyone was saying, I'm going to learn Russian, I'm going to read.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone's going to learn to play the harpsichord.
Yeah, but no, it was, I'm going
like that ever happened.
I'm going to sit and watch Married at First Sight in Australia instead. But I think then towards the end of the year, I think there was a bit more of a burst of energy, of creativity, people wanting to do things. And I'd had an idea I wrote 4 adult crime books in the early 90s. And the editor, my publisher, since I wrote the last one of them, he would regularly get in touch, said, "You got another one, Charlie?" But the Fast Show took over and TV took over, and then I started writing kids' books. So, but 25 years later, I rang him up. I said, "You know what? I've actually got an idea for a new adult crime book. Would you be interested?" He said, "Yeah, write it." So I have. In fact, I'm supposed to be delivering it today.
Oh wow!
This is it.
Have you got actual? Oh right.
Pictorial form. It was. I don't normally do. I do cards if I'm doing a script because it helps to sort out your flow.
Of course.
On the table behind, that's a script. That's a book. I don't normally do it for books because the great thing about a novel is you can be quite discursive and you've got time to wonder about. But it was quite a tricky structure. It's about lots of different characters, so it was just tessellating them. So I should be delivering that today if all goes well this afternoon.
Oh, I wonder if novelists use that technique all the way through. They probably did, but even before Post-it notes. I'm sure P.G. Wodehouse was arraying little tiny things to sellotape.
It's always a question you get asked as a writer, and particularly, if you do literary festivals, you'll get a certain percentage of the audience are there because they want to be writers.
Yes,
and they think somehow going to listen to a writer talk can in some way help them.
And after his talk, I'm going to get up and ask a question, which is actually me giving him some advice. Yes. That's right. Telling him that I'm a writer too.
Yeah. And it's going to be as if somehow this author will say, "You want to write a book? Oh, no, this is what you need to do. If you just do that, your book."
Yeah.
And of course, you ask a writer how they plan a book, you're going to get a different answer from every single
for
writer.
everybody. Yeah.
And some do, and traditionally would use little index cards and stick them up on the wall and plan every scene, for whatever you want to call it, and moment and incident, and plot everything out all around their room. And others would just start with an opening idea for a page or an interesting character or central idea and set off and see what happens, because you've got time. You've got at least, you've got a couple of years probably from start to finish on a novel to think about it and go back and change things and whatever. I'm probably somewhere in the middle.
The only decent piece of advice I ever read for writers was P.G. Wodehouse said, "First, apply the seat of the trousers to the surface of the chair," which is,
it's very good.
And most of the people at literary festivals never do that. They just like to think of having
waiting for inspiration. I'm a conduit. That's right. Yeah.
You do have to say, if you want to be a writer, the first thing you've got to really get on top of is actually writing.
It's right.
Yeah.
And that is it. As long as you write.
And also reading. The number of writers, there's people who are going to be writers but don't read other people and somehow think, well, no, I want to keep it original. I'm just going to keep it, I don't want to be influenced by others. I know.
Well, why not get your work influenced by one of the great writers who sold millions of books? It might help your book.
Yeah.
Well,
God, they're doing brilliantly. One of your children's books I can remember was about, what's it called? Hunter? I can't remember. It's about a plague that's sweeping the country and turning everybody over the age of 14. It's rotting their flesh and their minds. I thought that has a new dimension to it now.
I predicted COVID.
You did.
Very accurately.
You did.
Yes. Well, the series is called The Enemy. There was 7
The
books.
Enemy, that's it.
Yeah, it is. It's a plague that hits the earth that only affects people over the age of 14, who mostly wiped out, but enough of them have managed to survive. But they're so badly diseased and infected that they essentially behave like classic cannibal zombies. So it's kids trying to avoid being eaten by their parents. But they are also allowed to kill their parents quite brutally. So it works. It works both ways.
On so many levels.
Yeah, it's they've been very, very popular amongst kids. But I mean, it was an interesting thing because when I started writing it, I'd done a series of young James Bond books for kids, and I really love writing genre fiction. I love reading genre fiction, and I thought, okay, I've done thrillers. What's another genre that kids really like. And I thought, well, horror. And my oldest boy particularly was really into horror. And the great thing about horror is it is not a gender specific genre. Girls and boys, men and women, and all other sexes really love horror. And it's a great way actually for dealing with a lot of very adult concerns in a way that is palatable for kids, because it's through the filter of fantasy. So you are talking about death and disease and aging and corruption and change and paranoia and all these things that kids will have to deal with in their lives, but they're doing it through the it's vampires or werewolves or zombies. But with kids fiction, there isn't a set of rules of like what you are and aren't allowed to do. And you've got to kind of just find a way for yourself, and it does change as well. Levels of violence for whatever level of kids and things like that. So all I could do was I test drove the book by reading each chapter out as I finished it to my youngest boy, who was only 10 at the time, but as a bedtime story every night. I figured, he's my kid, I can do what I want. So I would start reading it to him, and I got to the first scary bit. I thought, God, this is going to be really... I was more nervous than he was, probably. And I finished reading it. I looked up and said, and he's just sitting there happily in bed. I said, you didn't find that frightening? He said, nah, that's fine. Stop frightening, Dad. And so I thought, God, I'm going to have to try much harder. A lot more in.
Trying to petrify your own child.
Well, yeah, because, kids today are exposed to so much more than we ever were.
True, they're very hard-skinned about this kind of thing.
Yeah,
they can go on, because then presumably you up the ante, right?
Yeah, so I just kept having to make it more and more brutal and just disgusting and terrifying. And we're about halfway through the book yet again. I thought, I'm going to go to bed. He refused to be moved. But it's about sort of 4 o'clock in the morning, woken up, and he comes into the bedroom and he's shaking like this. He's drenched in sweat.
Bathed in sweat. Yeah.
His pajamas stuck to his body. And so what's the matter? What's the matter? What's going on? He worked out he'd had a really, really awful nightmare.
Yes!
Basically. Yes!
There it is.
The room. I finally got rid of it. And that's where I found my level. So
that's wonderful. Well, look, oh God. Well, look, Charlie, we traditionally end, don't we, Dave, with the greatest record ever made. With your nomination for the greatest record ever made. You've probably got more than one nomination, and there is no wrong answer.
Well, I know you like. I found.
Oh, the Curse. What a great title! I always thought it was so funny because it's kind of cinematic and it's kind of gothic horror, isn't it? To call your own album "The Curse of the Higsons."
It was at a time where we'd sort of work in a recording studio, and a week later it would go bust.
Yeah.
We'd work with someone else and they'd come down with some terrible disease. It did feel like that. But I used to do all the artwork for all our singles and albums. So this is the actual original piece of artwork that I did.
Oh, very good. That's brilliant.
For Curse of the Higgs. But I can't nominate that. I did. All my records were in storage, but I did manage to dig out. For some reason, my son had a collection in his room.
All right.
I could nominate this.
Oh, right.
Wow.
I found in a junk shop.
Mariachi. Oh, yeah.
As no one else is ever going to be able to listen to it, I can't really go. But it is a fantastic. I love mariachi music.
There's lots of that. Have you ever heard Calexico? They've got wonderful.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wonderful mariachi.
Yeah, I went to see them a few times.
Yeah.
That's the greatest 12-inch reggae 12-inch ever made. That's Born for Purpose. Dr. Alimentado.
Oh, right. Yeah.
That is amazing. But I don't think you can. Yeah, and I think recently you can get the actual 12-inch.
Yeah.
That. Now,
the world of
funny. That's great. That's great.
Now, that actually was, I think my parents must have bought a second album.
Yeah.
And
has it got Charmaine on it?
No.
Surely.
But what it has got, the first track, Some Enchanted Evening.
All right, yeah.
That is amazing, sort of weird, spooky, easy listening. And that is the music we always played at the beginning of the Suit You sketches.
Oh, really?
When anyone goes into the shop, you can hear those Mantovani strings. Well, of course, that was only on the TV version. I think in the DVDs, because of copyright things.
No, absolutely. It's the way.
There's a sort of sound alike. Now that is a record I bought in the 70s. I bought a lot of like soundtracks and stuff like that. And John Barry.
Yeah. Part of the appeal of that Bond soundtrack is just being reminded of what it was like to be in a cinema when you were a kid. Yeah. So exciting. It's not just
when I was growing up, that Bond soundtrack, that for me was cinema.
Me too. You got that kind of musty smell of disinfectant and sweets and orange squash.
It sums up what could be in store for you: the excitement,
absolutely,
romance, the adventure. Yeah. It swings. It's got twangy guitar. I went through a phase of thinking, why do the pop musicians make records where they don't have a twangy guitar? Twangy guitars are just brilliant. But that, for me, sums up what cinema should be.
Yeah,
that big, amazing experience. That's another record I used quite a lot.
Sounds effects.
Used to make on cassette things. I used to make sort of stupid horror plays and stuff. So I've got a big collection of sound.
Yeah.
But no, I couldn't. I was looking through the records in quite excitement, hoping that one of my two favorite. Actually, one of them I don't even have on vinyl. I mean, one of them would be Astral Weeks,
right?
Which we talked about earlier, because it hasn't dated at all.
Not at all.
The sound of it could have been recorded yesterday. That weird mix of sort of classical elements and jazz and folk and rock and R&B. I mean, I came across the sort of original demos he'd done for it when it was straight sort of R&B versions. And it's really interesting to see that he had that sudden fit and said, no, let's do it like this. And you know about this a million times more than me, but I mean, it wasn't a huge hit when it came out.
It's often records that just didn't set the world on fire when they came out. The ones that just grow. Nick Drake's a really good example, actually. Just suddenly, about 20 years later, people go, this is terrific, Yeah.
And he never really sort of tried it in that style again. And also, the sort of talked to some of the musicians involved. So, well, it's just another session.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
He didn't know what he wanted.
Yeah. And then you listen to it and you think, but everybody is playing so amazingly, and these fantastic lines that they're all coming up with. So, so as I say, the records we listen to when we're teenagers are the ones that are always going to have the deepest.
Yeah, they are.
Mm-hmm.
But some of them, they do date. But for me, Astral Weeks sounds utterly contemporary, and I love everything about it. And there's enough meaning in the lyrics, but it's quite poetic and obscure. So I'm not constantly being bombarded with thinking, oh, he's writing about taking heroin now. Or whatever it's supposed to be about. I don't know.
I don't know.
Charlie.
The other one, because I couldn't, it would be Buena Vista Social Club.
Oh, yes.
Because I do listen to that. But that came out world of CD. I never had a vinyl version of that.
No,
amazing record. Yeah. Amazing record. And also the story of those guys, I still can't get over it. Yeah. The idea that I think one of them, Rodriguez, finished up working in a Manila cigar factory. Came out of retirement to rejoin the band. It's an amazing story.
I mean, that music had been forgotten, was considered wearing an old hat by the the guy in the Cowboy Hunter cigar. He was 90 something when he made that album. When he made that film, it's just extraordinary. A really, really moving film and made really interesting way and of course that all came about by accident, that Ry Cooder had gone there to record with some West African musicians who were going to play with the Cubans, because the music had gone to absolutely the Cuban music had gone to Africa and come back from Africa, so there'd been this sort of constant interplay between the Cubans and the Africans. But for some reason, the African band couldn't make it. They couldn't get their visas or something. The Ry Cooder was stuck there. Yeah. And he said, well, let's just record you lot then as you are. And just, I for a birthday present, it must have been my 50th birthday. Yeah, for my 50th birthday, my wife bought me and my son, who'd just done his GCSEs, he was 16, tickets to Cuba. We had a week in Cuba, staying in Havana, and it was amazing. It was a fantastic thing to do with my boy, because of course there's no there's no age restriction on drinking, so we could go to. You'd walk into a bar and they would have made 2 mojitos for you by the time you got to the bar.
That's parenting. That's fantastic.
And, well, you've got to do that with your.
Oh yeah. That's brilliant.
I once took when my son was 15. I took him to New York with me. My theory was, if he goes to New York with me, he'll have to talk to me because I'm the only person there with him. You know,
and you're on a strap next to each other on a plane.
You know, they get that stage where they don't want to talk to particularly their father.
Yeah,
They just don't want to. You know.
But of course, you couldn't go to the pub with him.
No, that's true. I couldn't go to the pub.
But
no.
God, how amazing to take them to the event. That's incredible.
But you know, the thing was, and they've got these extraordinary musicians just everywhere in Cuba. They're playing in all the bars and just in all the streets. There's music everywhere. But of course, this being 10 years ago, they were all playing Chan Chan over and over again.
Yes.
And I sort of just about got to the stage of, I don't ever want to hear it again. But then you'd hear someone else play, say, actually, no, I'm enjoying it.
It's like hearing Johnny Be Good or something. Yeah.
So that, you know, both those records have fantastic memories.
I took my boys to see them. Yeah, Ruben Gonzalez, Ibrahim Ferrer, Amara Portuendo. They were still there. I'm still at the Beacon Theatre in New York. And my kids are in the mid-teens, but thrilled to bits.
Well, unfortunately,
rare things like this may not work.
I slightly came to the album late. My brother-in-law kept saying, "You've got to listen to this album. You've got to listen to this album." I thought it was a salsa album, and I've never been 100% keen on salsa. I thought, yeah. Eventually, when I got around to listen to it, it was a few years later. So I feel really bad that I didn't. I would have loved to have gone to see them in concert with.
Oh, they were terrific.
I was a huge Rykuda fan growing up. I saw him play the Chicken Skin music album on. I've been trying to track it down ever since. He played pretty much the whole album on one of those BBC.
Yes, I was there.
Were you?
Yeah, they did it in concert. Were you there, Mark?
I was, I think. Yeah.
And with Bobby King and Terry Evans and what do you call him? The accordion player. I can't remember the name. Flaco Jimenez.
Yes.
Yeah, they were pretty sensational at that time.
Yeah. I loved that mixing up musical genres like that, and you know, seeing those bits of Buena Vista Social Club in concert with Rykuda. And Rykuda, you know, he's not up the front doing guitar solos; he's just sitting back enjoying.
Absolutely, not stealing the show.
You know, that is one of my big regrets not to have seen.
Oh, it's genius. Oh, Charlie, what fun talking to you. It's been brilliant. Absolutely fantastic.
It's been lovely.
Well,
I hope we haven't torn you away from your work. You've probably got
yes. What an important day!
You've got to hand in your book.
New book. How incredible!
Well, you know,
so the reason it's an hour and a half late is because of us. So you can tell them. Great to talk to you.
Cheers.
Fantastic. See you soon.
Cheers.
Thanks, Charlie.
Word in Your Attic, a Zoom with a View.